For most of my life, my father made me feel like I wasn't good enough. He made me feel broken, invisible, and afraid. I can so remember what it felt like when my father yelled, "Shut up, stop that. We don't talk like that." To escape that fear, I did what I always did. I imagined I was in the front garden of my childhood home, in my favorite yellow dress, smelling the sweet flowers, hearing the water in the fountain flowing back and forth, watching all the different colored lights, feeling the warmth of the sun on my cheeks. I felt safe in those thoughts. Believe it or not, I was apprehensive about this presentation today because I thought I wouldn't be as polished as other presenters here might. But then I thought, what am I doing? That's not me. I don't have to be perfect and polished. I'm me. I'm Pam. And I'm emotional. I get emotional and vulnerable, and that's okay. When I was in Toastmasters about 10 years or so ago, I was invited to talk to a group of young people who were part of a Young Optimists Club, which is like a public speaking and service organization for kids. I gave a 10-minute speech called "Don't Be Like Me," where I talked about all the things I didn't do as a young person because I was afraid. I didn't raise my hand in class because I stuttered. Don't be like me. I didn't want to give a speech in front of the class because I stuttered. Don't be like me. I didn't want to go anywhere after school with other kids because I stuttered. Don't be like me. I told them, be like you. There is only one of you. Be like you. Don't compare yourself to others. Be like you. Be you. After that talk, everybody clapped like crazy, and then the whole room stood up and gave me a standing ovation. When the rest of the event ended, people came up to me to say congratulations and to hug me, especially the parents of the young people there. The parents told me that I gave them hope for their children. They had tears in their eyes. I had tears in my eyes. I was enough. Being me was enough. So many of us don't take up the space we deserve because we're afraid of being laughed at, of not being taken seriously, and most of all, of being left out. And sometimes we even perpetuate that ourselves. When I started stuttering, early messages suggested that what I was doing was wrong and bad. When my father yelled at me, his face would get beet red and a vein in his temple popped and pulsed, and it looked like it was gonna burst. At least that's what it looked like to five-year-old me. That scared me. I felt flawed and that he was ashamed of me. I didn't want that reaction when I spoke. I tried so hard not to stutter. The only thing I could think of to not stutter was to not talk. So that's what I did. I pretended I had nothing to say, didn't know the answer, and was shy. And I didn't have many friends. You had to talk to make friends. I also found that I spent an inordinate amount of time trying to be perfect in those areas of my life that I thought I had some control over. I felt helpless with stuttering and couldn't find ways to control it beyond choosing not to talk. But there were other things I could push myself to excel at, to try to be perfect. It was an exercise in overcompensation. How many of you can relate to that, trying to be perfect? I think it runs in the stuttering family. This was just as exhausting as trying to hide stuttering. Because I didn't talk much or hang out with other kids, I dove into books and am a voracious reader. I loved getting lost in someone else's world where I could pretend it was my world, where things weren't so stressful and exhausting. I would read anything I could get my hands on, and used the love for reading to expand my vocabulary, which sure came in handy for my ever-present word switching. At one point, I could proudly say I had read every book written by Danielle Steele and John Grisham. I also strived to be perfect at school. Starting in third grade, I attended Catholic school, and being quiet and studious was greatly valued by the nuns. I was a straight A student, and it wasn't a big deal that I never raised my hand. I loved school and never missed a day. I loved being able to succeed and do well. It gave me some reprieve from the failure I felt because I stuttered. I also discovered that I really enjoyed writing, and it came easy. I never stuttered when I wrote. The words on the page were fluent, echoing the fluent voice in my head. Sometimes I would set out with writing something, essays, stories, poetry, and I'd be amazed that the words just appeared on the page, practically wrote themselves, and just danced across the page. Trying to be perfect was hard work. It takes a lot of energy, and there is so much potential to feel like a failure when something goes wrong. It can become a vicious cycle of trying so hard, beating yourself up, and letting negative self-talk take up way too much headspace, right? Just like stuttering, especially when the fear of stuttering outweighs the actual moments of stuttering. How many of you have spent hours obsessing about a bad stuttering moment that literally just took a second, but you replayed it in your head over and over again? I'm guilty of that myself. I lived that way for more than half my life. But that wasn't living. Sadly, I convinced myself that I was okay with pretending to be shy and quiet and a loner, when actually that was the furthest thing from my truth. I desperately wanted to be free, let my authentic self be seen and heard, but I just didn't know how. I felt stifled, even though on the inside I was loud and busting to be heard. I began to look for ways out, and the way found me. I was fired from a long-held job due to stuttering. At the time, I was deeply covert, using tricks and word manipulation constantly to come off as fluent, which caused great mental stress. Eventually, those tricks stopped working, and my natural stuttering began to slip out. A new boss decided that meant that I was a poor communicator and a poor role model for the young people I had worked with for over 20 years. I was devastated and shocked, and I felt guilty, like somehow it was my fault. My deep hiding, being covert, being fake was to blame. Maybe if I had just been up front all along, I might not have been fired. Or maybe I still would have been. It took me years to realize it was not my fault. That was it, though, my rock bottom. I did something for the first time ever. I typed, "Why do I stutter?" into the internet, and all of these resources popped up that I never knew existed. There was a local NSA chapter 15 minutes away from me that I never knew about. All this time, I had no idea. I was afraid to go, but I tried eventually. My first attempt, I drove myself there and sat in my car for half an hour and then left without going in. And I remember how I felt sitting in my car in that parking lot. I was so ashamed because I was too afraid to go in. I was angry at myself for once again letting fear make my decisions. The second effort involved emailing one of the chapter leaders, and she agreed to meet me in the parking lot and walk to the meeting with me. I cried when I actually heard other people who stutter. I was 44, and it was the first time I had met someone else who stuttered, who sounded like me. I could not introduce myself at that first meeting, and that was okay. I went back the next month and was able to say my name when asked to do so, but that's all I said, and it was enough. At the end of that meeting, I learned an important lesson. Even people who stutter don't always understand stuttering. Someone had asked me why I was there. Someone had asked me, why was I there? I was like, what do you mean? And she says, well, you don't stutter. You don't belong here. I felt like I'd been kicked in the stomach, and I felt so confused. My whole life, I'd been led to believe that I shouldn't stutter when I talked, and that stuttering meant broken. And now I don't stutter enough to belong even here? Even here among others who stuttered, I wasn't good enough? I went out to my car and cried. I'm a crier, can you guess? And didn't go back for a long time. When I did find the nerve to go back, I never saw that woman again. I soon found myself wanting to talk about stuttering with anyone who would listen. I found email groups called listservs back then, if anybody remembers them. One was known as Stuttering Chat, and I became addicted to it. I had so many questions, and these wonderful people, some who have been part of these groups for years, maybe even some of you are in this room, welcomed me, let me ask tons of questions, and happily answered and engaged with me. Finally, I felt there was a place where I belonged. I still stay in regular touch with one of the guys I met from the Stuttering Chat group. He was 19 then. And meeting others who stuttered, even just through email, changed his life. I remember one time in the group he wrote that he knew someone famous, and he was so excited. He had found one of my YouTube videos and had never seen someone who stuttered on YouTube. He lives in Dublin, Ireland. We email 2 to 3 times a month. He has never wanted to talk over Zoom or telephone because he believes he stutters so severely that no one should be subjected to that. He turned 33 2 weeks ago. We've been email buddies for 14 years. 3 months after getting fired and founding the NSA by chance, I went to my first NSA conference in Long Beach, California. It was the scariest thing I had ever done, flying across country alone to something that I wasn't at all sure what I was getting myself into. Can anybody relate to that? I have so many memories of that first conference, but what stuck for me was attending a workshop called Covert Stuttering Exposed. For the first time, I had heard a word for what I had been doing for more than 30 years. There was a name for hiding at any length, for avoiding, for purposely choosing to miss out. It was called covert. I felt such relief to meet other people who stutter, who sounded like me, especially other women who stuttered, and to learn that lots of other people played all these crazy hiding games too. It took me a long time to come out of the covert closet. I had learned to hide and avoid so well that it was just automatic to change or skip words, or just shrink back and say nothing. I often didn't realize I was even doing it until it stopped being effortless, until those word changes were no longer automatic. And I realized that now I was thinking about every word I was going to say and trying to choose words that I might not stutter on. Some days it felt like I was graceful like a swan on the surface, but beneath the water, I was paddling furiously just to keep up. And I didn't even know who I was trying to keep up with. I started exploring social media and found people who stutter on Twitter. I found Twitter before I found Facebook. I became at Stutter Rockstar in 2007 and started blogging in 2009 at stutterrockstar.com. The name of the blog was a no-brainer. I'd been talking with an amazing therapist for a number of years, Sorry, guys, not an SLP, but a great therapist nonetheless. He told me, you're not just another voice in a smooth talking world. You're nuanced. You make room for your stuttering so that your listeners hear the words sandwiched around the stuttering. I don't hear your stuttering, he said. I hear you. And your voice has a pleasing beat, a cadence to it. No one had ever said that to me. And that's how the blog, Make Room for the Stuttering, began. I was a guest on somebody's podcast around that same time, and he suggested I consider starting my own podcast. I was a little apprehensive, but I wanted to do something for women, to give us women, a minority within a minority, our own space to be heard. I had found my voice. I wanted to help other women find their voices too. This journey that I was embarking on filled me with such joy and passion. Despite that, I thought the podcast might only last for 5 or 6 episodes. I started to doubt whether women would really be willing to have their honest, vulnerable stories broadcast publicly on the internet. I was wrong. Last month, I published episode 259. And I felt that same burning passion in my soul as I did for the very first episode. I have had women from all across the USA and 43 different countries share their stories as guests on the podcast. What did they all have in common? Story. We all have a story. Some guests have told me, I don't have anything to say. And I've reassured them, yes, you do. We all do. It's probably just because no one's ever asked you. So I'll ask. A story is a connected series of events told through words, written or spoken, imagery, still and moving, body language, performance, music, or any other form of communication. You can tell a story about anything, and there's no limit on how short or how long it should be. Stories are, have been, and always will be an absolute essential part of being human. Stories are how we learn about each other, our past, and our cultures. Whether created to entertain or to tell a story, new stories are literally being lived, told, and created every second of every day. Imagine all the stories that are going to be told after the NSA Conference, right? So even if there was only one story for every person who ever lived, that would still be billions of stories in the world. It would be impossible to measure how many have existed and still exist. When we share our stories, we can impact people in so many ways and not even know it. In the early days of my blog and podcast, people would leave comments on the blog. When social media exploded and took over, blog comments all but disappeared. So sometimes I wondered, was anybody still reading my blog? And were people listening to the podcast? In 2018, this conference was held in Chicago. My friend Dana and I were walking around in Whole Foods after having had lunch, and someone approached and stopped us. She said, "Are you the Pam Mertz?" My jaw dropped. I was so embarrassed, and I felt myself just blush deep red. I was like, "Yes." And she's like, "Oh my God, I listen to your podcast all the time. You have helped me so much, you don't even know. Because of you, I disclosed for the first time that I stuttered at a job interview, and it was okay." She had tears in her eyes. I thanked her for sharing that with me. Dana said she thought the woman was going to ask me for my autograph. She said, "See, Pam, people know you. You're famous in the stuttering community." Even though that was embarrassing, it made me feel seen and heard and so good. Good enough. We sometimes never know the impact we might have on someone, and then sometimes we hear something like this completely out of the blue. I've spent time visiting schools to talk about teasing and bullying and use my experience with stuttering as an example of difference. Once I met with middle schoolers and we experimented with stuttering. We learned about getting stuck on words, and we had stuttering contests. Weirdest stutter, loudest stutter, longest stutter. Kids love it. And we use those like Chinese finger traps to experience what it's like to get stuck. Kids just love that stuff. When one of the class periods was over, a staff member approached me with a young girl. The staff was the school SLP, and the 9-year-old girl stuttered. I remembered the little girl was all dressed up, and she was wearing a little white fur jacket. She told me I was the first person she'd ever met that also stuttered. She asked me for my autograph. I will never forget that. I began to see me in these other women's stories. Every time someone expressed joy, pain, triumph, anger, I felt those emotions too, because I had been there. I had felt these feelings all throughout my life. Even when I didn't even realize it at the time. I realized that I really liked doing this podcast, and even that I was very good at it. I have had so many people tell me what a good interviewer I am, and that I put people at ease and ask just the right questions. People wonder how I do it, as I never prepare a script ahead of time. That's work. or send guest questions ahead of time. The key? Listening. I always listen intently to what you say and comment or ask you something based on what you just said. The conversations always seem so organic when we just talk and see where the story takes us. Stuttering makes us great listeners and memorable. Years ago, I was mortified at work when answering the phone, and I stuttered on the name of the school that I worked at. Someone asked me, "Are you sure?" and giggled. I didn't want to be known as the lady in the office who stuttered, but I was remembered. And standing out and being memorable isn't always a bad thing. Our uniqueness makes us stand out. We all have our own inner rock star. Mine, many of ours, happens to be stuttering. What's yours? Never in a million years could I have foreseen doing something so transformative. After 13 years, I still have the only podcast in the world exclusively for women who stutter. And I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. Why should I? There's always a story to be told. And my own story has changed over the years. My story as a person who stutters. Coming out of the covert closet and finally presenting my true self to the world allowed me to develop rich relationships with so many people like you all, truly for the first time. Instead of working so hard to be someone who I was not, I could just be Pam. After being fired, I found a new job, and colleagues were fine with who I was. They didn't care and treated me like anyone else. I developed a better relationship with one of my sisters, and we talk about stuttering sometimes now. In fact, she even had to listen to this talk a couple times. And the great friendships I have developed in the stuttering community worldwide have changed my life. Not just with others who stutter, but with so many who care about stuttering and care about me. What a great community to belong to. I have learned that getting outside of myself and my own head and focusing on something greater than me, this community, has helped me more than I could ever have imagined. Helping others has helped me immeasurably. In the end, it's not about what you have or what you've accomplished. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's what you give back, and we can all do that. I have also had the absolute privilege to start and co-lead an online support group for women who stutter. Once a month for the past 18 months, women who stutter come together and share personal, heartfelt stories that they've said they don't think they would or could share anywhere else. It's become a sacred space where women feel safe and connected. Women have shared that they have found it healing to just listen, laugh, and cry together. We have women who have been to every group since the very first one, and we have newcomers who find us every month, all ages, from 17 to 82. It feels so good to be part of something that so many women have told me they didn't even know they needed. And now they look forward to it every month, as do I. It's amazing how our five senses saved me as a kid and still make me feel safe today. We touch lives every day, all of us. Sometimes we don't even realize it, and we may never know the impact we have on others. Listen deeply. You'll hear the most amazing things. Look deeply. Hold eye contact. Be present. Breathe deeply, for breath sustains us. Talk long and deeply. Engage with the beauty of your voice. Hold hands for as long as it takes when someone introduces themselves to you. Revel deeply in that touch. And taste the sweetness of success when you realize that we are enough. I am enough. To this day, I gratefully enjoy the smell of fresh flowers and hearing a stream of water flow, feeling the warm sun on my face and watching pretty colored lights. They bring me such comfort and joy and make me feel safe. I see that scared little girl in her favorite yellow dress, and I want to just take her hand and tell her she's going to be okay. We are okay. We are enough. And we do talk like this. Thank you.